Okay, so that's the slide. And I'm going to switch over back to okay. Oh, okay. Okay, so let's just wait a couple more minutes and then I can get started. And again, if you can all chat in where you're calling from, I really appreciate knowing where all my audiences are. And again, I'm Kelly. Welcome. Welcome to this webinar. And I look forward to having you join me in this session and talk more about leadership as well as personal branding. And yes, on your right-hand side on the screen, you should see the chat window. And this is where you can enter in your questions. And also my student, Varvara, she is fluent in Russian. She'll be able to translate even if you want to type in your questions in Russian. And I'll do my best to answer. So yes, please let me know where you're all calling in from for this webinar. And that way I have a sense of where everybody is from. So I see some answers in the chat room already. Thank you for that. And yes, please take a look at your chat window to see or let me know where you're all calling in from. Yes, so I see that we have a number of people watching already. And yeah, I just want you to get familiar with how this works. So YouTube, again, I'm live with you through the webinar. And in order to interact, since I can't really hear you, I don't have video, I don't have the microphone for everybody that's joining in. The way you can ask me questions is through the chat room. So that's over on the right-hand side. So if you want to take a look, and for now, if you want to just let everybody know where you're calling in from, that would really help me. And also say hello to everybody. Great. So I'm seeing some of the entries already in the chat room. But yes, as you're joining in, please let me know your name and where you're dialing in from. That would really help. And again, my student, Varvara, she is fluent in Russian, and she'll be able to capture those questions for me. And then I'll be sure to answer them during the question break. So I see it's about 2 minutes after. So I'm going to go ahead and give my introduction, and hopefully a couple more people will join us, and then I can get started on the slides and the information for today's webinar. And again, hello, everybody. I'm Kelly Huang. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. I've been teaching at University of California, San Diego for about 10 years now. And I'm really happy that Irina gave me this opportunity to interact with all of you. And I'm really glad that I am able to share this topic with you, because becoming a leader and also building a personal brand, and also to broadcast your brand on top of a very strategically designed network is something I have been giving talks about, not only to my international students, but also to the scientists and entrepreneurs here in San Diego. So it's a topic I love to talk about, and I'm really happy to be able to share that with you. And a little bit about my background. I've been speaking about marketing and also leadership topics, like I said, in San Diego for about 10 years now. And I also do training, corporate training for Harvard Business School for their online classes, which is where I graduated from. And before that, I actually did sales over at IBM when I graduated from college. And that was for about 5 years. And then after I got my MBA, then I went on to Monsanto to work in China to sell their genetically modified seeds. And then more recently, after I moved to San Diego, I then started working with a lot of startup company and medical device and biotechnology, and also just regular wireless technology type companies. And I'm fortunate that in working with Harvard Business School, we have a lot of management professors that talk about leadership topics and share, their critical knowledge about how to be a better leader and how to manage growing companies. So I'm fortunate that in working with Harvard Business School Publishing, I can share those critical lessons with my students. And that's what I'm looking forward to sharing with you today. So let me get started. Again, I mentioned that my student Valvaro will be monitoring the chat room. So feel free to type in questions as they come to mind. And also, I am going to switch back and forth between my slide and my video feed. So bear with me. Sometimes there's kind of a funky looking transition that's going to happen. So I'm going to get started with that. And then, like I said, I'll definitely take 3 or 4 question breaks. But feel free to type in your questions as they come to mind. And when I stop, I'll be sure to answer them as they come across. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to the slides. And like I said, it'll look a little funky for a little bit, but we'll get going on that. Okay, so the topic of leadership and personal branding, like I said, is near and dear to what I do. And many of the topics that I cover are things that actually you would read about in Harvard Business Review. So I am going to give you the links to all of those articles that I refer to and the resources I'm going to point you to. So the best thing is probably I'm going to have you come back and check this YouTube link. And in the description is where I'm going to provide you both with the slide deck. So all of the slides today, I'm going to put into the YouTube description. So when you come back and check the video recording, you'll also see the slide deck link. And also any of the other articles and resources I'm going to refer you to, that's where you're going to look for the YouTube description, and all the links will be provided there. So let me get started on what I'm going to cover today. And again, I think personal branding is something that is very critical to everybody, not just entrepreneurs, but pretty much everybody that's in the corporate environment. And so I want to tell you more about it and how to get started. And also, some of the key characteristics of a strong personal brand is those are things I want to really have you understand, right? What some of those key characteristics are, so you can go and start developing your brand and to broadcast to your audience more about what your brand is. And on top of that, because you're building your personal brand, you'll have to think of ways to let people know what you do. And this is where networking comes in. And so in today's talk, in the second half, I really want to describe the various types of network that would be important for you. And so I want to distinguish between what's a resource network versus what's an idea network. And also I want to give you a diagnostic tool that helps you look at what your current network looks like so you can better develop it the way that you want it to. And then the last part would be to talk more about networking, because you want to spread the word about your personal brand. And so the way you do that is through word of mouth, through networking. And then I'll cover a little bit more about social media and, a little bit about publishing. But mainly today, I'm going to talk to you more about building that network and talking about networking. And again, if you have questions about today's topic, feel free to type it into the chat. And definitely when we take question breaks, I'll be sure to answer them. So I do kind of have it's an eye test for you here. So sorry, earlier in the slide, I'm showing you this person. His name is Bart Simpson. He's a cartoon character over here on the right-hand side. So Bart Simpson is pretty easy to recognize, especially for kids. And so my children grew up watching this cartoon. And so he's somebody with a giant yellow head, bulging eyes, right? So this is Bart Simpson. And in my next slide, so notice this wall of people here. I'm asking you if you can figure out where you can find Bart Simpson, right? So again, that earlier slide, if you haven't seen the cartoon before, it's somebody with a giant yellow head and two bulging white eyes, right? So pretty easy to recognize if you're familiar with the cartoon. But in this kind of wall of people, how would you find somebody like that? Can you see him? Because in fact, in this slide, he's in here twice. So let's see if any of you can have a look to see where he is. And I think this is a good analogy for what social media looks like these days. There are just so many people and there's so many options in terms of where you can get information from. And so it's very difficult to stand out, right? Even for somebody like Bart Simpson. So, okay, without torturing you any further, let's figure out where he is. So here's Bart Simpson over here, kind of to the right, over in the middle, right? And so I think this is the analogy I'm trying to make for you, that because of social media and because of competitive fields that you are all in, that it's very difficult for people to stand out, even if they do have a giant yellow head and bulging eyes, right? And so I think that's my point about wanting to stand out, that if you can build your personal brand, that you become more visible, then people are more likely to find you and want to follow you. So just for your information, there's actually a second Bart Simpson, and he's over here to the lower left. So I want to get into the definition of what personal branding is. And basically it's two parts, right? It's two parts. Starting with the perception. Personal brand is a perception that other people create around you. So whether how they feel or their impressions about you, that's something that is not controlled by you, but it's really an experience people have in having that relationship with you, right? So that's number one, your personal brand. But then the second part of personal branding is the art of standing out. And this is where you, as a consultant or a salesperson, this is the part that you can actively work on, because the perception is not necessarily controlled by you because it's other people's perception of you, right? But then the personal branding piece, the art of standing out, that's where you can actively work on those strategic actions in order to differentiate what you do and to differentiate yourself from everybody else. So it's, like I said, an active strategic set of actions that you would take in order to really stand out from the rest. So now that I've given you the description and the definition, let me take a break and see if everybody has questions here. Let me take a quick look. So, okay, so I don't quite see any yet, so I'm going to continue. But like I said, if you have questions along the way, do type them in and I'll be sure to answer them. So the next part is looking at your personal brand, right? And so like it or not, most of you already have a personal brand because your bosses, your clients, the people you interact with, they already have impressions of you, right? About what you do, what you're like. And so because if you're not actively working on your personal brand, it kind of gets, like I said, it gets controlled. The message is controlled by somebody else. So this is why you want to do the active strategic action in order to keep building on your brand based on where your strengths are and to also supplement your weaknesses, right? So it definitely takes some self-awareness work that you'll need to do to look at your own strengths and to also look at the weaknesses in your brand and then continue to build on that. So build on your strengths and to also keep working on your weaknesses so that they eventually become a strength. And also the other thing about branding is that you want to make sure your brand is consistent so that it's not one day as one thing and the next day is something else. So your branding should be pretty consistent based on who you are. And also you want your brand to be visible and well known, right? And this is what we're going to talk about later on in terms of promoting your brand. And the other thing I would say would be worth doing is to have your peers and your colleagues and clients and supervisors and also people who are really big fans, really enthusiastic about what you do. It's good to get their perception of you, but also to talk to the people who may have turned you down, or maybe people who weren't, who didn't have the best interaction with you. I think all of that can give you that full 360-degree view of what your personal brand is. So it really does take time for you to assess your own strengths and weaknesses, and then to talk to the people around you to get that perception of you that they already have and what kind of relationship you have with them. Okay, and then some of the key essences of personal brand. The first thing I want to start with is trust. Because unless people trust you, they're not going to buy from you and they're not going to follow you, right? So these are the key things about being in sales and also being a leader. In order to have people follow me, or in order to have people buy from me, they need to feel like they trust me and they have a rapport with me, right? So we want to be able to keep showing positivity with the people around us, that we don't criticize in a negative way, but also give people good feedback that they can work on. And then we also want to be consistent. Like I said, your brand should be consistent. It's not changing one day and then being something else another day. And also you want to be consistent in how you treat people, that you treat your clients all very consistently, and also how you treat your supervisors and your peers and people that report to you, your employees, are always consistent. So that's number one in trust. And some of the other parts of personal brand would be being excellent. And so to me, one thing I think, this one doesn't take special skills, right? Being on time is something that doesn't take extra skills. And also, when you promise somebody something, that you're exceeding their expectations, right? So that's also a sign of excellence. You definitely want to demonstrate your integrity. You want to show people that when they interact with you, that you're going to deliver what you promise. And then you're showing people what being in a relationship with you is like, right? Being excellent means that they're always going to get a good experience when they interact with you. And then lastly, this is where you can, again, do some of that self-development work to perfect an expertise. And this is where you can either start writing a blog or publish things that you do. You're showing people that you're becoming an expert and becoming more and more knowledgeable in a certain topic, so that when people say, hey, I want to know more about subject X, and then they know to come to you because you've shown to everyone that you're an expert in the subject X. Okay, so that's number one is trust. Number two is excellence. And the third one I'm going to cover with you is visible, right? Because in order, and this is a good analogy somebody has told me, that in order to build to profitability, those of you that are in sales, you need the two other components in your triangle, which would be visibility and also credibility. So this is where trust is the credibility piece and visibility is the other piece, right? So in order to become more visible, you need to, like we said earlier, build your personal brand, but also highlight what you do. And the ways that you would do that would be to publish what you are working on, or getting speaking engagements to get an audience, like what I'm doing with you right now, getting an audience, and also letting people refer to you, right? Getting enthusiastic recommendations. And so in order to get some of these possible visibility interactions, you probably want to have a website, or maybe blogging is another way. I find for myself, I've done a lot more videos and webinars, and they're a good way for me to promote visibility. And also tweets, using Twitter, so letting people know up to date what you're doing, what you're working on. These are all possible ways, or even email marketing. And the second part is to promote visibility for your personal brand is to participate in high impact events, right? So that could be a conference, or that could be some sort of get together with your peers and customers. Or one other way I always tell my students is to volunteer for things that they really want to work on. So there could be events. So for example, recently San Diego just had a big gathering of all the startup companies and all the founders and all the investors. And so I've encouraged a number of students to help out in this type of conference, because as you're volunteering and you're working with these entrepreneurs and working with these CEOs and working with these marketers, they're going to be able to meet people, and they'll also be able to show people that they are strong marketers or they're good at finishing projects. Okay, so I'm also going to switch back to the video now to see if we have any questions. So let me go back to my video feed. Okay, so let me take a look at the chat room to see if any questions has come through. Okay. Okay, so again, feel free to let me know if there are any questions that you have. I'm ready to take in some of your questions. And hopefully you have a sense so far of the definition of personal branding, and also what are those key traits about your personal brand you need to build in, right? Trust, excellence, and visibility. And also think more about what are different ways I can promote my brand. So I'm definitely going to talk more about that. Okay, so since I don't really see any questions at this point, I'm going to switch back to the slides. And again, feel free to keep asking those questions, because I definitely welcome them. Okay. Right. And I want to get into the why, right? Why do you need to do this? Why do you need to brand yourself? Okay, so why do you need to brand yourself? Because you are the spokesperson and you are the CEO for your ideas, right? Even though you might be with a company right now, chances are you have some specific ideas about what you do and how you want to build relationships. And so by you branding yourself, that in the future, if somehow you leave that company or you go to another company, go to another organization, or even develop your own company, you'll be able to keep building on what you've already done, right? Because for many of my students, I see them do this, and I used to have this. When I first started working at IBM, it's easy to just say, hey, I'm with IBM, and people already assume what they know about me. I don't have to tell them more specifically about, other things that I do. But these days, as I've shown you in that social media wall, it's very hard to stand out because, most likely you're in a very competitive field and a lot of people do what you do, right? So by branding yourself and by letting people know more about what you do and becoming more visible, you'll be able to take that relationship bank with you, whatever that organization you go to next, right? So this is where for salespeople, that your relationship and the rapport and the trust that you build with clients, the more you brand yourself, the more you'll be able to take that with you for the rest of your career. And again, I have an example about that, because even though I've not been with IBM for 25 years now, recently I was able to call up a manager of mine and to tell her more about what I'm doing. And she was immediately ready to give me a referral because of the work that I did when I worked for her. And then because I've changed and improved upon what I've done, she's still willing to give me that referral, right? She's still willing to be a reference for me. And so this is where, like I said, as a salesperson or even as somebody working for a corporation, that if you continue to build on relationships and build on your visibility, you can take that with you. And this is why you need to brand yourself. And also, as a CEO of your ideas and brand, you should take ownership of what you do, right? So take ownership of your brand. And like I said, even though I had IBM in my resume, there were specific things in technology that I like doing. And so I'm sure that's probably the case with you too, that even though you're with a particular company, there are probably specific hobbies or interests that you have in your field. So it's important that you let people know you have these specific interests because, like I said, as you build on that expertise, as you let people know about your specific knowledge about those things, that you can continue to build on that so that when people say, hey, I need to know more about X, that they'll know to come to you. And then lastly, to brand very effectively is to make sure that you have a core audience to target. So I do have a question coming in. I'm going to switch over and then answer that question for you guys. Okay. Okay, so the question that came in is, Kelly, what do you think if a person you want to reach is at a much higher level than you? And what's the best way to get noticed? So I do have an example about that. I recently did an interview with somebody named Magdalena Yasil, and she's the very first investor of Salesforce.com. It's a $100 billion company here in the US now, and they do Salesforce automation software. But the reason why I was able to connect with her is that she wrote a book called Power Up about growing up in Silicon Valley and learning things, making mistakes along the way as a female technology engineer, and also as a marketing and then eventually a venture capital investor. And so the reason why we're able to connect is because I read her book. In fact, I used the audio book because I know those of you are very busy, that it's actually very easy to get an audio book of a full 300-page book. And I'm able to listen while I'm driving. I'm able to listen when I'm taking a break. And so that's a good way to absorb content and become knowledgeable. So anyways, I read her book very thoroughly and thought about some specific questions I want to ask her. And so I was able to reach out to her on Facebook. And through Facebook, I mentioned that I really enjoy her book. I'm a big fan. I teach a bunch of international students who are all thinking about joining technology firms. And I would love to interview her and talk to her some more about her work. And luckily, that worked. So I think when you're trying to reach somebody either higher up in your company or somebody who is a well-known celebrity or well-known author, I think you'll have to think about ways to connect with them, right? To make that connection. And the way, like I said, I did that is through her ideas, because I read her book, knew more about what she's passionate about, and then wanted to connect with her on, about her book and interview her about her book. And I think that is what made it easier. And I think if it's somebody like a CEO at your company, or if it's somebody that's a high executive that you're trying to reach, that you should think about what it is that they're really interested in. So this is where the research part comes in. Research what they do, what they're interested in, and then try to connect with them based on that interest, right? So these are the things that I would recommend that you do, like whether it's through a book that they've written, or, in the case in the US, Starbucks just had a lot of racial harassment type issues come up. So they, if you try to interact with the Starbucks CEO by talking to them more about how to have racial equity, how to, design a better store experience for all types of people, that's probably something they'll respond to versus just saying, hey, I'm a salesman from company XYZ, can we talk? Right? So that's what I would recommend. Okay, so there's a second question, Kelly. What are the 3 most important features to underline in our industry? So I'm not as familiar with the boarding school world. I do understand about higher education here in the US. So I'll do a little bit of research on that, and I'll be sure to post my answer in the YouTube, or you can always email me, because I think I have my email somewhere on the slide deck. So you can always email me and I'll be sure to answer that more specifically. Okay, and then the third one, what if my personal brand becomes vulnerable based on, not very positive rumors? What are some things I can do if nothing has happened? So this is what we call kind of recovering. You know how brands always have something that happens. So recently, like I said, with Starbucks, where 2 Black Americans were harassed and told to leave the store, and that led to Starbucks shutting down the entire store to train people. And so that's, you're not Starbucks, right? So I'm not expecting you to shut down your business and try to retrain everybody if something like what you said happened. But in terms of rumors, I think the best thing to do is just to be honest with your audience. And like I said, whether that's through your website or your email or through your interaction with phone calls or webinars, that you tell people, hey, I have heard about this rumor, and the truth is they're not true, right? And explain to them what has happened. And then also, if there are some things that really could be perceived the wrong way, then, like I said earlier, own your mistakes and own your brand, because of course we're always going to make mistakes, but then what's important is how you recover from that mistake. And I know this from my Harvard Business School professor, that it's what's called service recovery. So again, I can put a link on that. Service recovery is how you repair from those mistakes, is what's going to make people remember about what you do. And that's what's important. Okay, so we're at a half an hour. So I'm going to keep going and try to give you another question break later on. So let me switch over back to the slides. Okay, so we talked about the reasons for wanting to brand yourself and why you need to do it. And let me talk more about how to better target those audiences, right? So whether you're in a company already where you have managers, you have employees, you have other salespeople you interact with, or other internal customers or external customers, or executives that you're working with, or people in other departments. Sorry, let's go back. Then you'll have to impress upon these people what you do, right? So a lot of times, of course, your managers and your employees and your peers have a good sense of what you do. But maybe you'll want to tell them more about, well, I'm also working on this, right? You're also working some additional aspect of your job or additional hobby you're pursuing. So that could be ways to letting people know more about your personal brand. And then in terms of job hunting, and this is where if you want to interact with people outside of your network, right? Hiring managers or recruiters or meeting people at networking events, or it could be people that you used to work with. I gave you that example about IBM, the people that you used to work with even from years ago. If you've done a good job, they'll remember you. And definitely friends in your personal network will be important for job hunting. And also, as a salesperson or as a consultant, your core audience would be your customers, right? Potential customers, and also people that can become your reference. They're willing to refer you to additional clients. And definitely other agents are important people to let them know about what you're doing and what your personal brand is, right? So sorry, I didn't get the chance to talk more about this target. So earlier we talked about Bart Simpson, right? So if Bart Simpson is the person trying to let you know what he or she is doing in social media, and because I teach marketing, this is a typical graphic we always use. We're letting people know about what I call the bullseye, right? If you're shooting an archery into a bullseye, the circle in the middle is what's called your target market or your target, right? So your target, you need to do your product design. You need to do your distribution. That's the place. You'll also need to price it accordingly based on competition. And then you'll need to promote it, right? Based on different advertising medium. So I'm going to talk more about that. What are all the 4 P's that you would need to do in order to better target this audience? So the 4 P's, starting with product. So number 1, like I said, I've said this many times with my students, that you'll need to know your audience first, which is why I gave you that slide earlier. Know who you're advertising to, right? Know who you're promoting your brand to. And then go into, okay, what are the products and services I'm selling? You know, what is exactly what I'm promoting to my audience? So is it my knowledge and skills, right? Because in personal branding, you are the product, right? You are the person that you want to promote to your core audience. So is it your knowledge and skills? Is it your connections? Is it your potentials to do great things? Or is it that if you switch to a different company, do you still have that same brand? And this is why I'm telling you that in order to keep building on your brand, you should build on your knowledge and skills that are portable, right? You want to keep building knowledge and skills that you can take with you wherever you go. And so that's why connections are important. Your potential is important, and definitely some knowledge and expertise that can go with you wherever you go. Okay, and then the second and third part and fourth part with the 4 P's would be to know how to promote your personal brand. So I mentioned that you can definitely do more networking by attending conferences. You can call on your contacts, right? The people that you already know, and have them introduce you to new contacts. You can also use Facebook and other social media to broadcast to everyone. And you can also think about how to really use different type of distribution channel. So that would be using traditional media events and publicity, or you can also network with different contacts at organized events. And you're also publicizing, maybe you want to put together your own events. And so that would be another way to think about how to distribute your media content, distribute your promotional strategy to everybody. And then the last part is pricing. And again, I don't know your field as well, but one thing I always tell my students is that you need to put a value on your time. So whether you're investing on a relationship or whether you're investing on, something that's going to take a while, make sure you price in your time so that there's a value put on what you're putting into your product and service, right? So you have a return on investment on your time that you're investing. Okay, so let me again take a question break and see if there's anything that's coming through. Okay, so let's see. Yes, so my email's there. I'm glad. So those of you with specific questions, do email me, and I'll make sure to do a little bit more research on the field that you're in and your specific area and see if I can answer them better. And so earlier I answered the question about how your brand becomes vulnerable. So like I said, you have to own up to the mistakes and also do service recovery so that people can better understand what it is that has gone wrong. And then more specifically, they know what you're doing to address those mistakes and issues. Okay, so the next question is, do you recommend sharing your contacts with others, and what's the best way to do it? So I have to say, for me as a professor, I don't like sharing contacts unless I know the specific situation. So if I'm providing a referral, I really need to know exactly the reasons why, and not just, hey, Kelly, can you just give me an introduction? So later on, I'm going to give you a resource. It's called this book called Friend of a Friend from David Burkus. And David Burkus has some specific strategies about how to introduce your friend of a friend to your contacts. And so I'm going to refer you back to that book. Okay, so again, we're at 7. Well, I'm at 7:39, so I want to make sure I get to the rest of the slides. But keep the questions coming, and I'll be sure to answer them. Okay, so let me switch over back to the slides on the 4 Ps. Okay, so let's get back. And what are some specific tips for delivering your personal branding statement? So, like I said, first you have to think about what your brand is, right? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are those impressions that the people around you are saying about you? So now that you know that, the way to bring it all together is to put together what we call a personal branding statement. And this is what is an introduction, right? The way you would describe yourself either on your website or something that you would do when you go to a networking event. You're giving like a quick 1-minute introduction about what you do. So I would recommend that you always have a script for doing this, that you have a script and you practice, and that you're also getting feedback from people about, how does that pitch sound? Does it sound natural? Because obviously, if I'm just reading from a script, it's very clear to people I'm just, saying something from a piece of paper, right? But if you practice, it's going to become more natural and people will hear what you're saying. And also, if you practice it with different audience, you'll be able to hear their impressions of you, right? And hopefully the right impressions are coming through and it doesn't sound too awkward. And the last tip I want to share with you is that people buy from people they trust. So I hope that in your personal branding statement, you have a way to show people that you're trustworthy and that you have integrity and that you are somebody they can buy and trust and, make connections with. And that is something I hope you can build into your branding statement. Okay. And since we already took a question break, I'm going to keep going so I can cover the networking piece. So some of the different types of network. So like I said, second half, I wanted to really cover networking and how to build the right kind of network in order to promote your personal brand. So I want to distinguish all the different types of network that you may run into. So this is something called an idea network that you see here on the panel. That somebody who gets together with other people with similar ideas. This is where a lot of my students that are scientists, they go to scientific conferences, or maybe even they go to a sales conference. Most of the people are like themselves, right? They have different ideas, they have new perspectives, but then people tend to be from the same industry or same field. So you're mainly sharing ideas, right? Exchanging ideas. And so that I don't think is the kind of network that most of us in sales or trying to switch a new career would be using as much. So the second type of network is where I think is more important to all of us, which is having a resource network. Because a resource network, this is where you have access to, whether that's a media resource, whether that's a funding, trying to get money to get your company started, or trying to get a referral into a new company, right? So a resource network is not as obvious. And also, these type of network is more invisible, right? It's not always clear to people where these resources are. So this is where we really need to focus on your strategic network. So let me describe what that looks like. So again, sorry, let me go back to strategic network first. So the strategic network, so these are the 3 types of network that I want to describe to you. And I think the first 2 is pretty familiar to most people, that in order to get your job done, most likely you have somebody who's an administrator, somebody who's a supervisor, and these type of operational network are people that can help you get your job done, right? And then in a company, typically, like I said, administrators, finance people, technology people, right? They're already built into the company. Now, most of us also have a personal network. And this is where you have maybe mentors or people in your family or your alumni group or clubs or a special interest or some sort of community you belong to. So people are already helping each other. They're already exchanging information, but typically it's because they know you on a personal level. So that's the personal network. And then the third type is the strategic network. And like I said about the resource network, your resource network is your strategic network. And so most people don't have as much of an experience with their strategic network, because if you're starting out in your career, or if you're a salesperson that's new in your job, most likely your strategic network is very narrow or small, right? So you'll have to find these people along the way. So they could be people outside of your organization. They could be people somewhere totally different, right? Somewhere not related to what you do. But somehow these are those key influencers that know people, that can give you referral, that can give you information, that can say, hey, I don't know the answer, but I know somebody that might, right? So these are the strategic network type of people that you'll need to get to know. So let me go back to earlier. I had this network diagnostic that I think would be helpful for you to start with, to start thinking about who needs to be in your strategic network. So the network, sorry, let me go back to this slide first. So one of the tools that I've shared with my students many times is this thing called the Leader Network Diagnostic. And you can click on the link here to take a look at it. Not right now, but later on, definitely take a look. So basically, this tool gives you a way to map out all the different key contacts that you interact with to do your job. And then after you do that and you assign points to them, you can then assess whether your network is open and diverse or pretty close and pretty insular. And ideally, what we like you to do is to create a network that's pretty diverse so that not everybody know each other. So you can see that the close insular network, everybody kind of all connect with each other, already know each other. They're all interlinked. But then the diverse network, you have people that might know each other, but most likely they know 2 or 3 people in common and the rest of people don't know each other. And this is what's called an open, diverse network. And so again, if you can do the diagnostic, you'll get a sense of what your network looks like currently, and you'll want to start developing these key influencer connections, right? So it could be somebody in a different industry. It could be somebody that's higher up in your organization. It could be a key customer referral where they know people that can connect you to some important connections that you need to cultivate. So this is where the ideal diverse network would look like. Okay, so let me answer one of the questions right now. And let me switch over to my video feed. Okay, so one of the questions that came through is it reasonable to broadcast lifestyle issues on social media? Does it add value or end sense to personal branding? So again, I think this is an interesting question because we're all people, right? We're all people, and we're gonna have different interests and hobbies. But I think, well, in the US, the social media platform I'm most active in is LinkedIn. I know that's not allowed in Russia, but LinkedIn allows me to keep everything professional. So I don't share anything about my kids. I don't share my personal photo. Everything I post is having to do with personal branding, having to do with my classes, having to do with the events that I'm putting together. So I think some of your Facebook groups are set up like that. So if you can share in your Facebook group all the professional stuff you do, but then maybe even have a separate personal account, that's what I would do. So I would have a Facebook group identity and keep that separate from my personal identity. And that way, my personal identity, I can share kids' photos, dogs' photos, but then my Facebook group identity stays professional. I think is the way I would go about it. Okay, and then the next one, what's better? Is it to promote a company or a person? which of these results is better financial results? So again, I think there's a way to do both because as I mentioned, I'm with Harvard Business Publishing, and I'm also with University of California, San Diego. So both of these companies, have good content and good classes that I'll promote. But then also there are events that I do that I, talk about what I do without talking about UCSD or without talking about Harvard Business Publishing. So I think you can do things like that, like I said, in your professional Facebook group ID, that sometimes you promote your company, but also sometimes you promote specific things that you're working on and specific projects that you're working on so that they kind of build on each other, I think is what I would say. Okay, the next one. What if the key person in a company hates personal promotion and is not a public person at all to make sale? Okay, so if it's a company policy, like I said, this is where I would keep your personal Facebook or professional ID separate from the company one. And I think I'm going to leave it up to you in terms of, do you want to create 3 IDs? So one that's strictly for the company, one that's more for your personal, and then one that's strictly for your lifestyle type things. So I'm going to leave it up to you to decide which is best. But I think you can, think about activities that you do that really doesn't impact the company brand. So you can promote things that you're going to, ideas that you like in your own personal social media platform, right? Without impacting the company too much. But then every now and then, if the company has some special events, you definitely want to use your personal Facebook identity to help promote that. So I do think you can cross over now and then. But yes, I would be careful if there's some specific policy, because I know in my husband's company, that's the case, that if they're using social media, our securities, the stock market regulation organization is very strict about that. You cannot promote a stock, you cannot promote your company. So he has to be very limited in how he uses his social media. So yes, be careful of that. All right, so since I only have less than 10 minutes left, let me wrap up the slides and see if I can answer any questions. But for sure, I'm happy to stay on and answer any more questions after 6 o'clock your time. So I'm happy to stay on, but if you need to go, let me make sure to finish up the rest of the slides for you. Okay, so I want to get to the point about why it's so important, right? Again, the why. Why do you need to have this strategic network? So again, look at the picture here with this person in the red. This is the person that's in your strategic network, because that tends to be the person that knows a lot of other people you need to get to know, and they may or may not be in your organization. And like I said, it's not always so clear where these people are. So you'll have to really kind of do your own research and think about what other organizations or what other departments you need to get to know to find these people. And once you have these strategic network contacts in place, they can help you test out new ideas. They can even help you launch a new product or service, right? Because they're so well connected. And then they can also become a source of referral, because these people have good networks. And especially if you're very effective in what you do, they will be happy to have you join their network, right? And then become a resource for recruiting new talent if you're trying to build out your company or you're trying to recruit more people for your organization. And lastly, people in your strategic network can become a source of funding, because again, they know where those key financial resources are. Okay, so now that we know why it's so important to have a strategic network, how do I get started? So basically, I think the recommendation I would have for you is to start building your brand first, because I know a lot of people with networking, they're wanting to get to that top person right away. And in the US, there's even a name for that. It's called the Oprah effect. Oprah is a very popular TV personality. And if you can get your book or your service shown on her television program, all of a sudden the sales go through the roof, right? But then it's not always easy to get to somebody like Oprah. So the way I would recommend doing it is start by building your brand first. Build your brand and then worry about how to connect to those strategic network type people. So publish your ideas, right? So if you're in the scientific field, which a lot of my students are, you can publish your ideas on magazines, on papers, getting your name known that way. Or it might be through blogging or social media, letting people know about interesting things that you're working on. And definitely continue to contribute to the groups and communities that you belong to. My next most important suggestion is do value-added volunteering. So what I mean is that volunteer your time at high-impact events or do interesting volunteer work so that the people that you're working with know to tell other people about what you do. So even though you're in a company where you may not have the opportunity, but for example, I mentioned that Startup San Diego event. By going to an event like that and volunteering your time, you're going to meet other entrepreneurs, you're going to meet other investors, and this is where you're going to add to your network, right? So not necessarily just through your company events, but go to events where you're more likely to meet the people you want to meet. And definitely, when you go to these events, you'll want to become a speaker. You'll want to join the panels so that people see you. They see that you're active. You're just not behind the scenes, but you're actually a speaker at these events. You're a panelist, or maybe you can even moderate or put together the panels, because I think that's also a useful way to volunteer your time. And then most importantly, like I said, you'll want to develop your own followers, either online or even offline through your hobbies and through your communities, because the more followers you have, the more likely other influencers will want to get to know you, right? If you have a valuable personal brand, then most likely other influencers want to come find you and then join your community too, right? So this is where I would suggest that, publish, create lots of content, create useful content, not just about your lifestyle, but useful content for people in your group, in your peer, in your industry. Do those value-added volunteering so people see you at these important events. Become front and center for your ideas. Talk about your ideas, become a panelist, become an evangelist for your ideas, and then create those followers. Okay, so just real quickly, I'm going to cover how to find these key influencers. So in network theory, you may know back in the days of using telephones, if you just have two people on the telephone, that's only one relationship, right? But then if you have 5 people, now all of a sudden you have 10 relationships. And then if you have up to 12 people in the network, notice that you can now all of a sudden make 66 connections. And mainly the point here is that it's exponential, right? The more connections you create, the more wider and bigger and more viral your ideas will become. So earlier, I already talked about how David Burkus has this book about friend of a friend. So in order to reach those people in other organizations, in other departments, you may need to use a friend of a friend in order to get introductions. So if you can see that they know of a person that you already know, you'll want to be able to find a way to get an introduction. Also, you can interact on social media group. Like I said, creating content is always a good way. And blogging and becoming an influencer yourself will make it more likely that you'll interact with other key influencers. Okay, so let me wrap up on there and some specific tips for nurturing your network. So one thing that I always say about networking is that you should think about giving to people and offering something to them before you ask for something back. And this is something I do myself, that when I meet somebody for the first time, I'm also thinking about ways I can be helpful to them, not so much about, oh, I'll need to get to know them so they can give me a job, or I need to give them my resume so that they can, put me into whatever organization I want to get into. The way I always think about it, and in the US, we have been talking more about what's called servant leadership. The way to think about networking for me is to give before you receive, and to give the favor first before you ask for it back. And then definitely another suggestion I have is to engage people, not just about professionally what you're doing, but also think about ways you can help on a personal level. So other people have kids, other people have things that they worry about. If you can offer suggestions and resources, not just to get the professional connection, but rather just to be a good person, to be engaging as a friend or as a good person to know would be another suggestion I have. Definitely, I think another way to make connections, for me anyways, is to give feedback. So a lot of my students always have some questions about career, questions about their projects. I'm always happy to give feedback. So again, think about ways that you can interact with people and give them something, right, before you ask for something back. And another way I see at networking events is to make introductions. So if you see somebody is new joining the group, reach out to them and introduce them to other people in the group, because that also, I think, can be a way to, like I said, pay it forward and to give somebody, help before they even ask for it. Okay, so this is where I'm going to end. I have a couple of resources I'm going to share with you, starting with my website. This is where you can get more information about today's topic. And also, you can look up the CCL Leadership Diagnostic Tool and David Burkus' book about how to get an introduction for a friend of a friend would be helpful. And also, those of you, for the female in the audience, I love this article about how women can develop and promote their personal brand, because we do kind of do things differently. So this article is a good help. And then lastly, those of you that are very much on the shy side, there's also some networking suggestions for introverts. Okay, so let me switch over to see if I can answer any more questions for you guys. Okay, so this says, what do you recommend adding your clients as friend on Facebook? Do you recommend adding them if they send a request, or do you recommend send it to so about customers as Facebook friends? So again, this is where I would suggest maybe having a professional Facebook identity and then having your personal friends and family identity, because I like being able to keep the two separate so that, I don't make the mistake of sharing something that my customers might find uncomfortable, right? Some people may not like dogs. And if I keep putting up dog pictures, that may not be something they would want to see all the time. But then if I have a professional Facebook identity, I do think that is something where you feel comfortable sharing things about your work, things about what's going on in your industry, what are some events you're going to. I think you can keep it professional there and then allow your clients to feel comfortable and not, make them feel awkward. Or if I keep posting something that's my interest, that may not be of interest to them, right? So back to my point about your audience. So if you have that professional Facebook identity, think about your audience and think about what's something that's going to be helpful to all of them, right? Helpful to all of them and not just to one or two. So try to think of content, try to think of events that would be of interest to the entire community. And like I said, keep the personal maybe on your personal Facebook ID. Okay, so is there anything else that I see here? So we're at past 6 o'clock your time, but I'm so glad you're here to join me. I really do appreciate you spending the hour. And like I said, I'm going to put the links and also some of the additional resources into the YouTube description, as well as the link to the slide deck. So do come back and check out the recording. or let other people know, since we talked about networking. Send the link out to people that you think might benefit from this or miss this event. And then I'll also have the link to the slide deck there. Can I answer anything else? Can I refer you to any other resources or talk about some additional topics that we talked about today? And again, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you spending the time, and especially all the way from Russia. I'm really enjoying what I'm watching on the World Cup with all the different venues and all the interesting games that are going on. And congratulations on Russia on beating Spain. So I'm really enjoying seeing all of that. And like I said, I work with a lot of international students, and I always enjoy the interaction and learning about different groups. And so if you do want to email me and tell me more specifically about the areas that you're working in or some more specific topics, I'm happy to answer those. But yeah, if you have questions, I'm happy to stay on to answer some additional questions. And feel free to jump off if you have other things to attend to. And again, thank you so much for spending the time with me today. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap up there. And again, thank you, Arena, for giving me this opportunity to talk with your group. I really appreciate everybody's time and all of the questions. So do check back, everybody, on the YouTube link, and I will add the additional resources. And also, I think you should be able to replay all of the chats and questions in the recording. And feel free to email me with any sort of additional specific questions for what you're dealing with, and I'm happy to answer those. Okay? So thank you, everybody. And I look forward to continue to interact with you and look forward to hearing from you either by email or if you can check out the recording and send it along to the people that you are working with, that'd be great. Goodbye.